So Vince's topic of the week is on Compendium Warscrolls, and I put those in quotes because I think yet again we're using the wrong word to describe what we're talking about. This came up when we were talking about the ghettoization of armies going into the Age of Sigmar, and I put ghettoization in quotes because it's not ghettoization, it's segregation. Segregation is splitting things up based on racial qualities, whereas or other qualities or whatnot. Whereas ghettoization is when everything goes from mostly middle class to very, very poor very, very quickly, and then you're looking on the street and there's a baby doing crack. That's not what that is, and this isn't what this is. We're not talking about compendium scrolls. We're talking about the legacy war scrolls. All of the armies that came from 8th edition that immigrated in 8th edition over to Age of Sigmar, all of those are compendium scrolls because they came in. And what we're talking about isn't the compendium scrolls, because a lot of those, all that happened is that those scrolls got gathered up and put into the Grand Alliance books, Order, Chaos, Death, so on and so forth. But we don't actually, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I would assume that those such as the Dispossessed and the Order Draconis and all of these other little individual factions that have their names in just the Order, Death, Destruction, Chaos portions of the General's Handbook, I don't think anybody's talking about banning those. I think everybody's talking about banning what is in the legacy section of those, or of the compendium. So I think it's fair to say not compendium war scrolls, but legacy war scrolls is really what we're talking about here. Second topic here was about the South Coast GT and Dan Heelan, because I think this is a lot of where the talk about the legacy war scrolls comes from. The fact that they banned it and then they unbanned it, probably because a lot of people wrote in and said, hey, why are you banning it? And I have kind of two thoughts. The first, I know everybody's saying that it's up to tournament organizers as to whether or not they want to accept it or decline it. Really, I think if we want to keep an official thing going in our community, you need to go with how the game was designed for match play or by Games Workshop entirely, and I don't think anything in those rules says, no, you can't play with the Legacy War Scrolls. They're pretty adamant about that. I don't remember seeing anything in the General's Handbook myself on that. The second thought is, I swear I caught this off of Heel and Hammer, but I swear they brought up that they don't like the legacy, or they don't like the legacy war scrolls. In particular, they want to keep the old world stuff in the old world and the new Age of Sigmar stuff in the Age of Sigmar, and that's understandable unless you remember what the history behind everything is. And to go into that very quick before I bring it up later, there is nothing that says there can't be any kind of desert-themed Egyptian army in Age of Sigmar. The reasons behind why Games Workshop didn't import that army are any number of, or that army and the Bretonnians are any number of reasons. I think if we go Occam's razor, the easy way to say it is that both of those armies have a lot of resin and metal models that Games Workshop wasn't going to reprint because nobody was buying those models. There was a good reason nobody was buying those models, mostly because both of those armies were terrible under the rules that they had been written under at the time in 8th edition. For any number of reasons, Games Workshop dropped those models as opposed to trying to keep them, rebuild them, renovate them, or whatever. And that's fine, but there's very easily they could have brought these into Age of Sigmar, and I want to get to this at a later point. But this was one of the reasons behind why the South Coast GT wanted to drop these armies in the first place. And there is one caveat to that, and the caveat is that if Games Workshop, because Heelan is is very associated with Games Workshop, if Games Workshop themselves said, you can, or please start dropping legacy stuff, we want to get rid of that section from the General's Handbook, and they said, okay, we'll do it, and then had a big community backlash and said, well, we got to put in the legacy Warscrolls. This would be a very good hint to Games Workshop, hey, don't drop the legacy Warscrolls. But I don't know any of that story on its own. I don't watch, or I don't listen or watch to Heelan Hammer at all, so I don't know exactly on that. But it goes from there. It goes from saying that part. Vince's response covered a number of suggestions he had. First one being do nothing. Second one being overcost points, which I think the Necropolis Knights are maybe the only thing that everybody's mentioned is undercosted, so you probably need to bump those up by about 40 points or so. Complete removal, which I'm very opposed to, and I'm not opposed to it. I want this to come down from Games Workshop. I don't want it to come down from any kind of, because it's not being played in tournaments. Because one of the other things that gets played in tournaments, especially 40K a lot, that I want nobody, that I wish would be one of these, well, we don't want anything to do with it, please don't bring it, is Forge World stuff. Those of us in the United States that Warhammer as a whole and 40K is a very expensive hobby. The fact that you can bring in Forge World models that are worth a lot more, or that are worth a lot and do a lot better at playing, the fact that you can bring those in says you're really paying for, you're really winning a tournament because you paid the most money, not you're winning the tournament because you have a better, list or whatnot. So I'm not a big fan. I don't see how we can have both Forge World stuff and or we can say yes to Forge World stuff but no to Legacy Wars models. Even if one is purchasable still and the other is not. But so I'm not a big fan of let's remove it. His fourth suggestion was formats, and I know where he's coming from with Standard and Legacy. The big thing on that is I don't think there's enough. I don't think the player base is big enough to get spread out over two things, and there's not enough from a lot of the reason that there was a split between Legacy and Standard was the fact that there were all of these old models that did, or not models, cards. There were all of these old cards that were worth a lot of money at the time. All of the Mox and the Power 9, Black Lotus and whatnot. All of them were worth a ton of money. And the big nerd rage is, because Magic had Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, and then they had this revised set where they reprinted a lot of these things. And when they reprinted the revised set, a lot of people's prices, or the prices on the cards dropped instantly. And that was a very sore topic of contention among the Magic community. So the one thing they didn't want to do is to reprint these cards that everybody needs to kind of win at Legacy, or at playing at the time. So Magic didn't really know what to do at the time. So what they did is they had this other format called Standard, and that eventually grew another format called Extended, where it was a lot more cards, or a lot larger basic cards, going a little bit further back into the past, but not all the way to the past. And then you got Legacy and Vintage and stuff like that. I think as of right now, or that could be a solution later on. But a lot of the things that would cause that to be a solution is that you have to get rid of other large chunks of army. And as of right now, Warhammer isn't producing enough stuff that says, well, I'm going to build a brand new army every year. I have my own personal, like, 15 armies, but nobody, very few people, I think, in this hobby actually build a new army every year. They usually use the same ones that they had, and they might build a new one after their first year with their first army, but that's probably it. They'll probably play those two armies for the entire time that they play this game. There's no churn on that end. There's no kind of there's no way for there to be any kind of standard tournament or format, so I don't know what the purpose of there being a legacy is, other than, oh, you can also bring Tomb Kings and Bretonnians, but that's not worth building a new format. What's going to happen is that the standard without the format without the Bretonnian and Tomb Kings will grow, and the other format will never exist because nobody will even care about playing those. So, and I feel as a player base we're way too small to try to be divided into two separate parts just on this one topic alone. Kind of a few of the other old topics. I think a lot of this has to talk about the old guard, and really I think the old guard moved on. I think a lot of the old guard that didn't like Age of Sigmar probably went over to the 9th Age and are probably causing all sorts of havoc over there. I know Ant brought up the fact he brought up the whole dumping in the old guard, and so did Doom and Darkness. I think Doom and Darkness is very. I think he understands why we need to get rid of the old guard. They are a bunch of grog nerds that for Games Workshop they're not going to sell any models to the old guard at this point. So why even try to cater to them? And I think that's a fair point, but I'm going to this is a very extreme example, but this is going to go into everything. New starter set. Okay. And that Stormcast and Khorne Bloodbound. If we really want to raise the middle finger to the old guard and really piss off all of them, the best way that Games Workshop could have done that and said we're sticking with this new Age of Sigmar thing is to say that the only legal armies are anything that's come out after that starters or after the release of Age of Sigmar. We could have told the dwarf players, the Dark Elves, the Warriors of Chaos, Skaven, and the Tomb Kings, the Vampire Counts, all the old armies, we could have told them, fuck off, we don't want anything to do with you in Age of Sigmar. This is a brand new game. And then started off with Stormcast Eternals and Khorne Bloodbound. And I think everybody would have said, no, we're not going to play this game. We'll stick to 8th edition. We'll go join the 9th Age team and make that an actual product. Or maybe we'll just go play Kings of War. We may douse our armies in or throw our armies into Xylene and then catch the whole thing on fire. The last thing I think most people would have done is actually play Age of Sigmar. And I think that's really what Ant was bringing up when he was talking about why he plays Age of Sigmar. Because he's got the models for it, and it's not that horrible of a game. But to say that we want nothing that is the old part of 8th edition to be involved in Age of Sigmar, I think that's kind of ridiculous and out there. Which I think gets into the next part of Doom and Darkness's video, which he doesn't want to play with old models. He wants to play with the new Age of Sigmar stuff, and I can't blame him for that too much. But I think a lot of why he has to be able to accept those people has a lot to do more with the history of why we got rid of the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings, as opposed to why they weren't just intermingled into the fluff. Because you can always say the Tomb Kings were this part of the Death faction that served Nagash like part of the Death faction, but they actually were the ones before Nagash, and while they'll fight with him, they're always looking to try to overtake him and overthrow him. And you can always just lump the Bretonnians in with the Dispossessed and the AoS, because nobody gives a flying fuck as to what exactly the AoS portion in the Age of Sigmar is. So to say that we're not, or to say that they can't be a part of the narrative, or they're not a part of the narrative, therefore I shouldn't have them, is bullshit. for all intents and purposes. The real reason that those models got dumped is because of how many of them were metal or resin and how few of them were plastic, and how you really can't build. I don't think you can really build a full Bretonnian army. I think the only plastic models, and I'm not positive, I didn't collect everything. I didn't collect the Grail Reliquate because by the time I wanted to, we were already going to made to order. But I think the only plastic things in that are the Knights of the Realm, Knights Errant, the Bowmen, and the Men-at-Arms. That was pretty much it from them. That's, I mean, as stupid as we're going through and saying, let's have Shadow Blades, which is just basically an assassin and Dark Riders. That's not an army, or that neither of those two are an army. As far as Tomb Kings go, they had a lot of the same problems. There was enough there with constructs, but the Necropolis Sphinx, or the Necropolis Knights were plastic. The Necro Sphinx and its Sphinx-related things. I think there's a plastic Tomb King on chariot. The chariots themselves, I think, were the only thing in in a lot of the other stuff that was in plastic was basic death stuff. It was skeleton archers, skeleton warriors. I think death probably would benefit from having some skeleton archers or something range, but I'm not going to go into that whole discussion. The problem is that both Tomb Kings and Bretonnia, because Games Workshop made a pretty big push right around that time that said, and you can look at this into what they got rid of off the legacy shelves, and it's basically anything that was metal or resin they got rid of. And you can also go and say, well, there were a few plastic models that even got removed. For whatever reason, they got rid of the Empire Knights. I don't know why exactly. They weren't horribly old models compared to the rest of the Empire stuff, but they got rid of those. They got rid of a lot of cav stuff, which I think the big issue with that is that when it comes to cavalry, being able to move 10 inches will mean that everybody's in combat, and or that they're in combat in turn one. And I think Games Workshop was trying to get away from doing that with the whole let's move and then another phase for charging. So that's probably why all the horse stuff, and they wanted to get rid of that existing in every single army or whatnot. And I think as of this point, I've finally kind of, I've mentioned all of the points I kind of want to get out there. I think pointing the comparison, which Vince was trying to do as to, hey, look, Magic the Gathering did something like that. I think that's a good comparison. I think, but not everything is like Magic. We're not going to get the churn that Magic gets as a company. And Ant covered a lot of the card stuff. As far as Doom and Darkness goes, I think he means well when he says we need to get rid of the old guard. Because they're not really going to do anything for Games Workshop as a company. They're not buying they're not buying all this new Zinch stuff. They're looking at, well, how can I get as cheaply as possible? And really, the easy way that Games Workshop can get people to buy things is to drop the prices on everything. But they're not going to do that, so we're not even going to talk about that. I think there's an easy fifth solution that hasn't been mentioned, which is to just reprint the Tomb Kings in Bretonnia, and then, you know, okay, so we got the big things out of the way, so what? Really, I don't like this idea. Games Workshop got rid of both of those armies for the reason that they weren't selling, and I think looking into the future, they may get rid of a lot of other armies for the exact same reason. But I think a lot of this can also do with warehouse management. I think this Tomb Kings and Bretonnia things, or Bretonnians, had been sitting on the shelves and hadn't been moving in any sort of fashion. I think tomorrow you can find out that one of the Sky Cutters is sold out. It could, or any other random unit, and nobody's gonna care too much because they weren't getting bought, and enormous rate, but they weren't sitting on the shelf taking up warehouse space that otherwise could be used for any of these new models coming in. A lot of the other new models could go the exact same way. I think the reason that we keep seeing things sell out like Sylvaneth, and I think the Ironjaws sold out too, the reason we're seeing them sell out is because Games Workshop doesn't create a lot of them to start off, and then, oh, we're selling out all of them? Oh, that's fantastic. Let's go ahead and print some more. Which that isn't too hard to do as a I would think that they would set themselves up so they could, okay, we need to start making these because our warehouses are running low on them. So, but any case, if you liked my opinion, if you like the content here, subscribe. If you enjoy the pleasing sound of my voice because it puts your child to sleep, that's kind of creepy. But you like, subscribe, comment below. If you think I missed anything, or you think I was completely wrong on something and would like to comment, especially if it was on the Healing Hammer and South Coast GT. I don't listen to their show, so I didn't know what exactly they were coming from. Again, it's segregation, not ghettoization. We're talking about legacy Warscrolls, not compendium Warscrolls. So, with that, have a pleasant rest of your life.